math, science, language, history, nutrition, cultures, geography, and fun. BreadMake, the Math and Science Dough Show. There's a lot more than fiber and good nutrition in a loaf of bread. That's why kids everywhere are making their own at BreadMakes. BreadMake brings fun and learning together. Kids work in pairs, stirring, pouring, and kneading. They move on to the challenge and fun of measuring liquids like oil and honey. They see how dry and liquid ingredients form mixtures. They define new words like absorption and expansion. They learn the impact of timing and temperatures. From the moment they wash their hands and tie on their aprons, they're riveted on their very own loaves of bread taking shape. From slurpy batter to soft dough and on to Play-Doh, the fun and learning accelerate. They even create bread animals if time allows. All too soon, it's time to shape the loaves and place them in the pan to rise. Children learn to listen, to follow directions, to work side by side. Beginners as well as experienced bread makers of all ages are fascinated with the original Play-Doh and delight in the special fun of making bread together. Bake the risen loaves on site or let the children take them home for baking with family and friends. The magic ingredient to creating all this fun and learning is the Honey Bear Bread Box. It contains practically everything you need: the bowls, stir sticks, measuring cups and pans, the yeast and honey and salt, even aprons and a tote bag with the printed recipe. It takes the hassle out of planning for this unforgettable 90-minute bakery tour. All you add is flour, oil, warm water, and 30 eager bread makers. Lisa Kawada of the Laurel Leader had this to say. New product reviews teaching K-8 gave BreadMake high marks. So, schedule a few helpers, open your bread box, set out flour, oil, and water, tie on aprons. You're set for fun and a whole lot of learning.
Welcome. I'm Gloria McAdams. You're planning a bread make. It's going to be a lot of fun. You'll be pleased with the results, both the ones you eat and the ones you assess. Making bread is one terrific way to teach math and science concepts. Students learn about units of measure, how to handle various mediums, dry ingredients, liquids, and even syrups. They learn about timing and reading thermometers. They discover the meaning of such words as mixture, absorption, expansion, batter, and dough. Best of all, planning and setting up a bread make is going to be easier and simpler than you may have imagined. For more than 17 years, I've taught bread making to thousands of students. I've learned a few tricks along the way, and I'm happy to share them with you so your bread make will run smoothly from the very first step. I remember my first class. From my point of view, it was nearly a disaster, until I discovered I'd omitted one vital bit of information. It was the day before spring break. Those 5th and 6th graders seemed eager enough, but all out of control. Standing before them there in the multipurpose room midway through the activity, I couldn't figure out why there seemed to be so much tension among the students. Were they always this hostile? Why all the noise and confusion? Then it hit me. I'd forgotten to tell them we were making 2 loaves of bread in each bowl. They had presumed that whoever possessed the bowl took home the bread. Once I clarified that every one of them would take home a loaf, that we were only working together during the mixing stage because a package of yeast was impractical to divide, we had smooth sailing from then on out. You don't have to worry about such an elementary goof as that. With this video and the teacher's guide included in your Honey Bear bread box, you can count on a truly successful activity. Why don't you get that guide right now? Let's walk through it together. Pause for a moment just inside the front cover. Notice the section, Information Worth Having. You'll find here a listing of resources that you'll appreciate having as you put together a teaching unit focused on bread. If your schedule permits, call or write for these items. If you've already scheduled your bread make within the next week or two, it's probably too late to request and get this information before then. But it's not too late to request it so you'll have it in time for next year's class. Now turn to page 2. As you get started, there are a few decisions you need to make. First of all, there are 2 ways you can use this video. The simplest and most direct is to cover your tables with craft paper for a clean work surface, set out the ingredients, tie on the aprons, and begin part 5 of this video. There I walk you and the students through all the steps of bread making to a loaf that each one of you will be proud of. On the other hand, you may wish to be in charge of the activity completely yourself, or you may wish to designate someone else to lead out. If so, you can use this video as a training tool. Watching the video, following the specific directions in the teacher's guide, will give you the help you need to assure a successful live bread make. Second, you need to decide just who is going to make bread. No doubt you already have a target audience in mind, or you wouldn't have ordered the bread box and this video. But have you considered the value of integrated learning? Making bread in pairs is a natural way to bring older and younger learners together. The truly amazing thing is that both sets of students take away different learning outcomes from the shared experience. And even if the older ones have made bread previously, their maturity readies them to pick up on aspects that went over their heads earlier. In addition, a second bread-making experience reinforces a practical lifetime skill, one that they may never acquire at home like our grandparents did, or even pick up in a home ec class. A third consideration in planning your bread make involves where the bread will be baked. The activity will take 90 minutes. The bread will need to rise for about 1 hour before it's ready to bake. Usually I schedule the bread make for 1.5 hours just prior to dismissal. That way, bread can be taken home to bake and the whole family can share the joy of eating fresh, warm bread. If your students are involved in after-school programs, as most students are, dough may overrise and need to be punched down and allowed to rise a second time prior to baking. Review the notes beginning at the bottom of page 25 and advise your students about what they need to do if baking is delayed beyond 1 hour. Keeping the dough in a cool place will slow down the rising and possibly prevent over-rising. If you choose to bake the bread on site, allow for a 1 hour rising period after the bread is in the pans. Normally it takes 30 to 35 minutes to bake a loaf, but putting a lot of loaves in one oven will require a longer baking time. Test the loaves for doneness before removing all of them. It may be necessary to rotate the loaves in the oven because of the uneven patterns of heat distribution. If you choose to bake on site, you'll probably want to make bread in the forenoon. Let it rise during the noon hour and bake it right after lunch. In any event, you'll want to coordinate this with the kitchen manager. You will also want to mark the pans with student names. Use permanent markers to put names on the ends or sides of the pans. If possible, plan for some adult helpers. They can help set up paper tables, draw water, set out supplies, and assist students with tying on their aprons. Those aprons can be a bit tricky. Sometimes they stick together like the plastic bags in the supermarket produce section. Rub the bottom edges together like this, and the apron will open up fully. Take a tuck in the apron before you tie it when it goes on a short student. I've found, however, that if you invite too many adult helpers, it results in students helping adults rather than adults overseeing and facilitating your students' learning. I often tell adults that I'm confident that they know how to measure, but our goal is to help the children acquire these skills by letting them do it themselves for the most part. Helpers are most useful during the bread make by making sure that the right ingredients and utensils are quickly passed along from one person to the next. Helpers can also be useful in identifying those bread makers who might be having difficulty and assisting them. Learners at all ages are fascinated by the yeast and wheat experiments. These take most students into a new scientific setting. Notice on page 13 the repro entitled, "What Makes Holes in Bread?" Discovering how the microspores of yeast produce carbon dioxide gas captivates even reluctant learners. I've included 3 extra packages of yeast in the Honey Bear bread box for your use in experiments. You can observe that merely putting the yeast in a jar or bowl causes no reaction. Add sugar and water, cover with a plastic bag, and secure with a rubber band, and then watch as the yeast begins to produce gas. Do other experiments without the sugar, and use hot or cold water instead of warm water. Note the differences in how the yeast behaves each time. These observations lay the groundwork for understanding the concept of variables. Sprouting grain and learning about germination is another fascinating spin-off of bread making. Use the wheat kernels provided in your Honey Bear bread box to grow a crop right in your classroom, or embellish the project and make a dish garden like the one here. Wheat grows so fast that you can measure its height every day and observe its dramatic growth. Directions are on page 14. In addition to the Honey Bear bread box, you'll need a total of 25 pounds of flour, 10 of which are whole wheat, and 15 a high gluten flour like Gold Medal, better for bread. You'll also need 10 to 12 ounces of vegetable oil. Honey Bear bread is a mixture of whole wheat and white flours. This combination is more nutritious and higher in fiber than an all-white loaf. Brown craft paper is ideal for covering tables and providing a sanitary work surface. Tape it down and use permanent markers to draw the red and blue lines that indicate which team students belong to when they are paired to make bread. In order to designate students as either red or blue partners, a colored line is drawn down each side of the tables where students are seated. Notice the alternative marking pattern for round tables. If students are working at their desks, adapt the marking suggestions so each student knows whether he is a red or a blue partner. To set up the mixing bowls, place in each one a 4-ounce cup for measuring flour, a 1-ounce cup for measuring oil and honey, a packet of yeast, a knife, and a stir stick. Wash hands, put on aprons, and let the fun begin. Pages 20 through 27 follow the video presentation. It's exactly 90 minutes, but the segment on making turtles is optional. If finishing on time becomes a critical factor, just fast forward to the place where we cover the dough with the deli tissue and let it rest for a while. I know from experience that every class is different. Each one has its own personality. Some groups will find the video timing perfect. Others will think it moves too quickly, some too slowly. I don't always have the leisure of making turtles and doing the creative Play-Doh type things that young people enjoy. Sometimes a particular class doesn't get to the Play-Doh stage in time to stop there and have fun. We have to keep moving right along to finish before the school buses arrive. The kneading and pounding segments are always a favorite part. But if your group goes out of control with the pounding segments, skip them. I discovered that not all small hands have the strength to adequately develop the gluten to a smooth and elastic point by kneading alone. Pounding the dough is an alternate way to develop gluten, and students enjoy it immensely. In any case, either with or without the pounding, the best loaves are the result of thorough kneading, kneading which produces smooth and elastic balls of dough. Only the final punching down is absolutely essential. The dough does need to be flattened before it's shaped and put into the pans. Bread making is an outstanding way to teach many different kinds of learning. I've even seen kindergarten students make loaves that rival mine. But remember that whatever the results, whether bread or bricks, the experience is a learning opportunity in and of itself. And even bricks give off a wonderful aroma and can be tasty if enjoyed while warm and fresh. If you live in a big city, you may never have seen wheat growing. But where the sky is really wide and the sun is really warm, fields and fields of grain grow. First the little sprout comes up, then the tall green grass, and finally in the top of the green grass stalks, kernels of wheat develop. At first the kernels are green just like the grass, but as the wheat grows, it begins to ripen and change color. When grain is ready to pick or harvest, as the growers say, both the grass and the kernels, sometimes called heads, are beautifully golden. The heads are separated from the stalks and milled into flour. The stalks become straw for animals. For centuries, flour was made by grinding the kernels between large stones called millstones. The whole kernel, including the outer covering of bran, the sprouting section called germ, way down at the bottom of the kernel, and the soft white interior are all ground up together. Sifting the flour to remove the bran and the germ produces white flour. For centuries, sifting was done by hand. It took a long time to sift the whole wheat flour to get just a little white flour. So the millers charged more money for the white flour. But bakers preferred the white flour. With it, they could bake breads and pastries that sold for a higher price than coarse whole grain bread. They also preferred the white flour because it had a longer shelf life. Taking out the wheat germ removed all the natural wheat germ oil, so the white flour would not become stale and rancid. And furthermore, the creepy crawly things wouldn't touch that white flour. Smart creatures, those bugs and mice. Somehow, they knew that the whole wheat flour contains the nutrients that makes them healthy. Sifting out the bran and the germ removes more than 20 vitamins and minerals, the tiny nutrients in food that feed the cells in our bodies and make them healthy. Sifting does something else to flour. It removes all of the fiber from white flour. Fiber is the broom that sweeps through your body and keeps it clean. If you don't have fiber in your bread, the nooks and crannies in your body fill up with leftover bits of food. Now imagine how horrible it can be inside a body that is full of leftover food. You know that if you don't throw away the leftover bits of food that pile up in the kitchen sink, it turns to garbage. It begins to rot, and ooh, does it smell bad. In the same way, leftover food inside the body turns into garbage too. That's why it's important to have a fiber broom on the inside of your body, keeping all the corners clean. When you eat bread made with whole wheat flour, it's just like sending in a big broom to sweep the garbage out of all the corners inside you. Fresh fruits and vegetables also contain fiber. They help the wheat fiber. Together, the fiber in whole wheat bread and fruits and vegetables can help you live a long time. Let me tell you a story about that. For this story, we'll go clear around the globe to the island of Denmark. In 1917, almost no rain fell. Without water, grain could not grow. Without grain, no one could make bread. The Danes thought about buying grain from other countries where the rain fell and there was a good crop. But that wouldn't solve their problem. There was a war going on that year, and the enemy thought that starving the Danish people would be easier than fighting them. So they surrounded the island with their ships. That meant that no boatloads of grain could get past the enemy ships. No, buying grain and shipping it in would not solve the problem. The Danes were really worried. If they didn't get grain to make bread with, they might starve. So they thought again and remembered that they did have quite a bit of grain stored to feed their animals. They decided that people were more important than animals, so they told the bakers they could use the stored grain for bread. Bakeries began to make what they called super bread. It was a hearty whole grain loaf full of whole wheat and whole rye flour. They didn't want to waste any part of the kernels of grain, so they refused to sift out the bran and the germ. Super bread, plus the fruits and vegetables that the Danes grew in their small gardens, was about all they had to eat. Most of the animals died, so there wasn't much meat and very few eggs and only a little milk and cheese. At the end of the year, the doctors noticed something very strange. Instead of starving to death, fewer and fewer people were dying. Fewer and fewer people were getting sick. They concluded that there must be something very good about whole grain bread and fruits and vegetables. The next year, 1918, everybody in the whole world, it seemed, came down with the flu. It was a really bad flu, and millions of people died. But not in Denmark. There the people ate the very best kinds of food: whole grain bread, fresh fruit, and fresh vegetables. The flu bug didn't have a chance. Deaths in neighboring countries went up that year, but not in Denmark. The people in Denmark were protected by the good foods they ate. Some got sick, but when the doctors counted up the number of deaths that year, it was far fewer than they expected, based on what usually happened. Doctors in Sweden heard about the Danes, and they decided to see if eating these healthy foods would be good for athletes. They set up an experiment for testing the athletes. In the first test, for 3 days, the athletes ate lots of protein and fat, mostly meat and cheese, only a few vegetables. Then they got on the exercise bikes. They pedaled hard for almost an hour before they were exhausted. In the second test, the athletes consumed about half meat and fat and half fruits and vegetables and grain for another 3 days. Again, they got on the exercise bikes, but there was a big difference this time. They pedaled along for almost 2 hours. But the doctors wanted to find out what would happen if the athletes ate almost no meat, just lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, and lots of bread and cereal. So for 3 days, that was the program. Lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, lots of whole grain bread and cereal. When the athletes started pedaling, they could hardly be stopped. They pedaled past the 1 hour mark. They kept on going right past the 2 hour mark. In fact, they kept at it until they nearly reached the 3 hour mark. Now, you know why the strongest athletes in any sport, the long-distance runners, even the young men and women who compete in the Olympics, all eat lots of fruit, lots of fresh vegetables, and lots of whole grain breads and cereals. Wouldn't it make good sense for you to eat like an athlete? Shortly, we're going to be making bread together. You're going to enjoy it, and you're going to enjoy eating the wonderful bread you make. With me, you'll measure and mix, knead, pound down, and shape your very own loaf of bread. Whenever you prepare food, there are a few rules you should keep in mind. Honey Bears reminded me to make a list of these for you. Rule 1, be clean. That means clean hands. Hands that are washed with soap on the inside, on the outside. It's even a good idea to scrub your fingernails like this with soapy water, especially when you make bread. because bread dough gets thick. And the only way to really mix it well is to use your hands, unless you have a bread machine. Being clean also means that you'll keep your fingers away from your face. Being clean means that if you have to cough or sneeze, you'll turn your head away, use your shoulder to cover your mouth. Being clean means that you must begin with clean utensils. A clean bowl, clean measuring cups, clean knife, and a clean stir stick. Or a clean spoon when you make bread again at home. Being clean means that you must protect the dough and the utensils from picking up germs and dirt. Be careful not to drop tools or dough on the floor while we work together. Now here's rule number 2. Honey Bear says, be safe. That means being careful with sharp knives. Whether they're plastic or metal ones, treat them with respect. It's not a good idea to wave them around carelessly. Being safe means having an adult help you with baking. Bread must be baked in a hot oven. Only an adult at your house, or someone chosen by your parent, should turn on the oven. Being safe means using pot holders or oven mitts to remove the hot pans of bread from the oven when the bread is finished baking. Being safe means careful with hot water. The water we use for making bread must be hot, but not too hot. If the water is too hot, it will kill the yeast and the dough will never rise. When we make bread together, the water will already be measured for us. But when you make bread at home, you'll get the hot water from the faucet. If it's too hot, you may burn yourself. It's a good idea to turn the cool water on first, and then the hot water. Feel the water, adjust the temperature by turning the handles to get the water that's just a little bit warmer than you would take a bath in. That's when it's just right for making bread. There's one other rule while we make bread for being safe, and that is don't throw flour. Throwing flour can result in somebody having some in their eye, and that can hurt a lot. Now this brings us to rule number 3. Pay attention. When you make bread, you need to follow certain steps in a certain order and do them right if you want to make a loaf that you'll enjoy eating. If you want others to enjoy what you make, you want to do it right. Paying attention means not losing your utensils, like dropping your cups or losing them in the bag of flour. It means not throwing away your stir stick or your knife before we've put the dough in the pans. And most of all, paying attention means following directions. Watch closely when I demonstrate how to do something. Then do it the same way when it's your turn. Paying attention means stopping when you're finished. When the directions say stop, that means stop. It doesn't mean to keep on going. When we make bread or prepare food, we can ruin it if we keep on going. If you keep on whipping cream, you'll get butter instead of whipped cream. If you keep on cooking syrup, you get hard candy instead of fudge. If you keep on stirring